the scroll of he knew and selected fragments from the scrolls of tofu. Introductory epigraph number 1. Mel C. Thompson said, "That which does not kill me makes you weaker." Introductory epigraph number 2. Little Bhikkhu said, "My master has nothing to offer, but he's much more generous with nothing than anyone else." Non-disclaimer. The characters issuing these quotes are actually as wicked as they seem to be. However, I have changed all their names so that no one will ever know who they are. You may not think you can attain enlightenment by reading their words, but, in fact, the gods only allow the final truth to come from the mouths of scoundrels. A saintly person is far too innocent to see the brutal truth of the matter. Introduction. A student came to me and said, "The matter is hopeless. I'm never going to meditate every day, and I hate chanting the sutras. Furthermore, I don't like reading the sacred texts, and there's no way in the world I'm going to live an austere life. My attachments are endless, my addictions are intractable, and my greed is out of control. I'm going to need to know the very quickest and easiest way to attain liberation." I could not promise the student anything would work out for him, but I gave him this short scroll and wished him luck. The scroll of he knew, notes on the path of almost no teaching whatsoever. You may have noticed that there are no prostitutes or opium dealers stationed at our gates. This is not because of our virtuous living, said Sensei the time traveler. The purveyors of vice were simply forced to relocate once this temple ran out of money. We are trying to construct an illegal distillery in the basement. But until then, I'm afraid you will have to settle for bitter green tea and our bodhisattva song and dance. The dreaded Fujikami said, "Many sophomore kids think Buddhism is gentle and that monotheism is based on fear. But within a week of studying with me, those kids soon learn what real fear is, and then they go running back to monotheism for comfort." Little Bhikkhu said, "Money, fame, love, and Zen all turned out to be nothing. But Zen turned out to be my favorite kind of nothing." The dreaded Fujikami said, "Bodhidharma said there was nothing holy, but really, if any of you weren't craven weaklings, I'd bow down and worship you now." Little Bhikkhu said, "Both Zen and Valium fail to cure anything at all, but both make you feel better about being totally incurable." The dreaded Fujikami said, "You milquetoast students here are luckier than you know. In the old country, Once we caught sight of anyone at all like you, we had them taken out to the edge of town and strangled. On the other hand, you might be very unlucky, since medical science might prolong your trivial lives and force you to endure living as yourselves for decades. Fu War said, I told my students to abandon greed, and they saw that money is meaningless. Later on, I told them to abandon lust, and they realized that sex is meaningless. Then I urged them to live for love only, and through this they gained great wisdom. At last I summoned the bodhisattva courage to tell them that love is meaningless also, and at last they were finally liberated. 108 dusts said, you ought to retain some greed, if only for your own safety. I have it on reliable sources that if you get a bit too close to attaining total selflessness, the gods will send assassins. No Way I Go said, Zen masters aren't silent because they're enlightened. They're silent because they're afraid of giving you the same bad advice you so frequently give to others. No Way I Go also said, many famous sages boasted to you of their celibacy and never tired of bragging about their absolute chastity. But privately, they all told me that celibacy was easy for them, since, as luck would have it, they were simply bored with sex. Tofu said, the real reason a prophet is always rejected in his hometown is that they tire of him giving away all of their business secrets. Therefore, the prophet must live on the run, leaving each city before everyone finds out how many gullible customers they've lost. The dreaded Fujikami said, expecting a comedian to protect your feelings is like asking a prostitute to protect your virtue. No Way I Go said, the upside of seeing a psychologist is that you might eventually learn how to form healthy relationships. The downside of seeing a psychologist is that you might end up committed to several of those healthy relationships. 108 Dusts said, many people assume that thieves enter into a life of crime after losing all hope of ever making enough money. But most of the thieves I know entered into a life of crime because they lost all hope of ever making their customers happy. 108 Dusts also said, before you come 1,000 miles to see me, I will already know the question you're going to ask me, and you will already know the answer that I'm destined to give you. But still, it's very important that we meet face to face. Tofu said, whenever poor men escape starvation and ritual humiliation, the people of the coastal provinces are driven into a state of mourning. Mel C. Thompson said, "Basho would be ashamed of me, except that he is still a dead man, and I am still alive and annoying." Introduction to the selected fragments from the scrolls of Tofu. Sometime later, the student returned and admitted that he was no longer striving for liberation and had come to terms with his cipher-like existence as a near non-entity. However, he was curious if I had any more scrolls of poetry to give him. So I gave him this even shorter scroll, composed of fragments of larger scrolls that were lost to history. He took the scroll and, before he left, noted that he was thinking of going celibate, not because he had attained anything lofty, but because, he said, and I quote, "I can't imagine involving the kind of women I date in the clear light of the void, or anything like that," unquote. I nodded in as sympathetic of a way as I knew how, and as he took his leave, walking away briskly with his scroll in his hand, selected fragments from the scrolls of Tofu. Notes on the path of almost no money at all. 1. I have produced these works, but sadly the emperor rejects them. Now I suffer loss of faith, even as my brother's fame spreads. 2. The young women parade through the banner-filled streets. They seek profitable husbands. I've not had a date in months. 3. I sit in the cold silence of this slat-board guard shack, guarding the coal mounds from the hungry hands of villagers. 4. The simplicity of the country life we lived at Divine Rice Road. It is always stamped on my heart. Too bad they chased me out of there. 6. The nobility of being a simple worker, tending to the planting of seeds. It was all ruined one day when I groped the farmer's wife. 7. In the distance temple bells ring, hearkening back to monkish days. Truly, I have learned this lesson. Never raid the abbot's sake stash. 8. Even the children in the streets know of my poetic doings. Your verses, they tell me, always ring of falsehood. 9. I was accidentally published by an inattentive editor who mistook my name, thinking I was my famous brother. 10. Sometimes I find partially burned pages of my poetry blowing about the deserted streets of the outskirts. My books are used as fire kindling. 10. When I speak to women passing by, they scowl and look sickened. Turning to each other in disgust, they snicker at the sight of me. 11. The gods have been good to me. I say this without proof. Gods come to the aid of men, I say, but who am I trying to kid? 12. The teapot is steaming hot. The sole reason I rise from bed is to sip from its offerings. For a brief moment, I have dignity. 13. I lie every day to the fat women, claiming to think they're lovely. They're almost foolish enough to buy it, but at last refuse to sleep with me. 14. I only achieve brief notoriety as an editor of other writers who achieve some fame. You can spot good work, the critics said. Too bad your own writing's not credible. Back cover text from the paperback edition. Hundreds of years ago, an old scholar was slowly traipsing across the Gobi Desert, trying to transport some scrolls of poetry and philosophy from China to Mongolia. However, he was overwhelmed by a sandstorm. His progress was stopped and, worn out by the stress of his difficult journey, he fell over and lost consciousness. When he awoke several hours later, he noticed that the bundle of documents he'd been carrying on his back had broken open and the pages were blown all over the desert. Some could be found in nearby bushes. Others were half submerged in sand. But other portions of these precious manuscripts had been scattered across the great expanse or had been buried completely. In the distance, camels could be seen actually eating pages of writing. By the time some rescuers reached him, he was dehydrated, disoriented, and suffering from severe exhaustion. They put him on a primitive gurney and carried him to his destination. What remained of the manuscripts, including the scroll of He Knew, was kept in storage at the monastery until it was brutally sacked by marauders some decades later. The scroll of He Knew was said to be lost to history until a mental patient in the San Francisco Bay Area claimed to be channeling it from his hospital bed. This document is the unlikely product of that disturbed person's ramblings.